Shabbat Shalom. This week's parshat Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, comes out to meet him. And from this meeting, we learn some important things. Yisro, though he's not a Jew, or not yet a Jew, according to the Midrash, is the first to do some important things that become very basic and fundamental to Jewish life. For example, to say Baruch Hashem, something that we say all the time. The first person to say this is Yisro in our parsha, and in fact, Chazal say that it's sort of embarrassing, even a disgrace to the Jewish people that during the Kriyas Yamsuf and leaving Egypt, no one said Baruch Hashem. We said the Shirat Hayam, we sang a hymn of praise for our liberation, but no one said this blessing, Baruch Hashem. But when Moshe tells Yisro about the whole story, Yisro spontaneously says Baruch Hashem. Another thing that we learned from this week's parsha is what we call Sudat Mitzvah, a meal that is a holy meal, a meal that has a significance, religious significance. According to at least some midrashic interpretations of the parsha, Yisro converts to Judaism, and he goes through the whole formal process as it became eventually codified in the halacha, circumcised, going to the mikveh, and then at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the ger would also bring sacrifices. So Yisro brought sacrifices, and after the sacrifices, he made a meal, Sudat Mitzvah, like we also do after a brit. The Torah says, "Vayikach Yitro choten Moshe olaz v'chim Elohim vayevo Aaron v'chol zeknei Yisrael le'echol lechem im choten Moshe v'fnei Elohim." And this phrase that they ate bread, if lechem is bread, lechem, a lot of people think it's like in Arabic lachem, it means meat. V'fnei Elohim, eating before God, is a phrase that calls for comment. The Rav, in his wonderful book on Sefer Shemot, is part of his Paros on the Torah, it's in the process of publication, says that the Greeks would have been appalled to hear that one eats before God, because we become close to God by intellectual activity, not through some, satisfying our bodily appetite for food, which takes us further away from God. And actually, it's not just the Greeks. The Rambam and many Jewish thinkers across the ages have felt the same way. But the Rav goes on and says that this is a chidush, an innovation, something that Judaism brought to the world, that by having the meat a sacrificial meat, the meat, the animal was sacrificed as part of a religious act. This transformed the Suda from a simple, gorging and eating to an expression of fellowship, not just the fellowship between humans, between Jews and fellow Jews, but between man and God. It's as if Kaviyachol HaKadosh Baruch Hu is participating in the Suda, and it's an expression of fellowship between man and God. This is a very bold idea. I'm pretty sure that it comes from the things of some of the Hasidic thought that seeped into the Rav's Litvak education and tradition. But in any way, it's clear that the demands of a Suda that are held in a religious atmosphere force us to stop eating like animals, and to, even in the course of a festive meal, to do it all b'kedusha b'tara in a very serious mode. the Talmud learns in a number of places from this pasuk that whoever participates in a meal in which a Talmud Chacham is present, it's like eating before the Shekhinah. And the Rav points out that the word that the Talmud uses for the involvement of the Talmud Chacham, shori betocha, is very unusual. It's shori lashrot in Hebrew means to soak. So it's the Talmud Chacham is soaked into the meal, deeply involved in the meal. His presence has a deep impression, a very strong effect on the behavior and the mindset of the people participating in the meal, and the whole meal becomes soaked with the presence of the Shekhinah. And in fact, we have other places where we use metaphorically words having to do with eating to the enjoying the divine presence. The Talmud talks about the tzaddikim, zanu enehem en ha-Shekhinah, their eyes feasted on the Shekhinah. Well, like I said, the idea of this meal, the Sudat Mitzvah, breaking down the ontic barriers, the imbridgeable ontic gap between man and God, and allowing for some sort of fellowship between man and God, is a very bold idea of the Rav. But I want to talk now more about the more sort of lower level, mundane idea of a meal, which is no less important. Meals, common meals, communal meals, meals held with other people, are a very key way of breaking down social barriers. Even in a family meal, like we will be having, this Shabbat, where family members that we don't see in the course of the busy week, everyone's running off to their business, and when they're not running off their business, they have their nose stuck in their telephone, and now these barriers come down, and we can be with one another and restore this feeling of community, of being together, and of course communal meals as well. And this is particularly important for the Suda that's spoken about in our parsha, because Yisro's feast, this communal feast, was the Sudat Mitzvah of the Brit Milah. Now, Brit Milah, as I said, has these formal halachic requirements, which with the full list in the time when their sacrifices would be Milah, Tevilah, Korban. But even though after these requirements have been met, and Yisro is now a full-fledged Jew, and we can count him in the minyan, and so on and so forth, what really transforms him and makes him a part of the community is this communal meal. Because we have what anthropologists would call eating taboos, which we call hilchot kashrut, one of whose purpose is, in fact, to erect social barriers, to put them up between us and non-Jews. As the Chazal said when they forbade stam yena, even wine that was not offered any libation to pagan gods, but just ordinary wine that non-Jews have handled, it's forbidden mishum chitun, because breaking down the social barriers, having a drinking party with the Gentile neighbors would eventually lead to intermarriage, and we don't support that. It's not something that's illicit. It's not an alternative way that we have to accept and so on, and all this sort of rhetoric that we hear. We're all inclusive to everything, and it's all it's all paper mache. No, we have definite social barriers, which are meant that even though we participate in the general human quest for social justice and technological improvement and things of the sort. But we do not want to have to cross a certain boundary which would lead to intermarriage. And after conversion, of course, these barriers come down, and there's no better way to do it than to have this feast together. So Yisro makes this feast, and it's interesting. The Orach Chaim puts out that he didn't have to invite anyone. Of course, on our own day, we don't invite people to Sudat Brit Milah because the halachic concern that someone may not be able to come, and then it becomes a problem that he was invited and didn't come. But here, I don't know about that, but the Orach Chaim points out that it says that after Yisro brought his sacrifices, Vayavo Aaron v'chozek Yisro, they came on their own. They didn't have to be invited. Of course, they were welcome and they participated in the meal. Now, who's not participating in the meal? Moshe. Vayavo Aaron v'chozek Yisro. Moshe is not part of the meal, and the Baal Shem Tov says that the Torah never talks about Moshe eating. The contrary, the Torah talks about Moshe not eating. Lechem lo achalu, mayim lo shata. Baal Shem Tov, because Moshe has, spiritual food. He's nourished on spirituality, so the Torah never speaks about him eating. But other Meforshim have spoken, have addressed the question: where is Moshe now? It says that they came to eat im chotein Moshe, with Moshe's father-in-law, Lifnei Elohim. Some say that where was Moshe? He was not eating. He was not taking part in the feast. He was serving tables. Moshe haya mishamesh lifneihem. An expression, I think, of the way Chazal want to make the point of how this Sudat Mitzvah, this communal meal, where the main item consumed is a sacrifice, is an important holy event in which it's an honor even for someone like Moshe to be serving. But others have said that actually, to go back to the point that the Rav made at the beginning, that Moshe was there. He didn't eat, but he honored the Suda with his presence. He and of course his presence put, I think, a very high level of spirituality on the whole event. When you have someone like Moshe Rabbeinu in the room, you act differently, think differently, talk differently, and the Midrash says that this is how the Midrash learns that when you have a Talmud Chacham in the meal, it's like eating before God because they're eating in the presence of Moshe, and because this raised the level, the spiritual level, the religious level, the concentration on important things, and the whole atmosphere to an incredible level of kedusha. That it's as if they were eating before God because of the kedusha that in which this meal was held. Because of Moshe's being there, it was as if they were eating before God. So I think we should think about these things, and we should try and have our Sudat Shabbat have it as much of an atmosphere of kedusha, of Torah, and trying to put to apply to our lives some of these lessons that the Rav and other of our sages have taught us from our parsha. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.